She stood on my dock with her sunglasses low on her nose, staring straight at me like I was trespassing on my own land. "You can't fish here anymore," Karen snapped, waving a bright red paper in my face. "The HOA voted. This lake is closed." I almost laughed. This lake wasn't part of any HOA. My grandfather had owned it for 50 years and the deed was in my safe. Still, something in her smug smile told me she wasn't bluffing. The next morning, the water stank. Fish floated, belly up along the shore, and a green film spread across the surface. My son gagged when he saw it. I knew what had happened. Karen's crew had dumped something in overnight trying to teach me a lesson. But they didn't realize this lake was more than just mine. It was the same reservoir their neighborhood pipes were connected to. As I picked up a dying trout with my bare hand, Karen's voice echoed from across the water. "Told you we'd shut you down." She had no idea she was about to poison her own family. By evening, the HOA was gathered on the clubhouse lawn, bragging about how they had finally stopped the fishermen. I stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, watching their kids chase each other with water bottles filled straight from their kitchen taps. Karen noticed me and smirked. "Enjoy the smell of your dead pond?" she sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of the neighbors chuckled, but others shifted uncomfortably. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and played the video I'd recorded from my trail camera. 3 men in HOA jackets, under Karen's orders, dragging barrels and pouring liquid straight into the lake. The gasps around me were instant. Karen's face flushed, but she kept her chin high. "That's fake. He edited that. You can't prove anything." Right then, one of the moms screamed. Her little boy was clutching his stomach, vomiting into the grass. Another neighbor shouted that their tap water tasted like chemicals. People began murmuring, panic spreading like wildfire. All eyes turned back to Karen. She opened her mouth to deny it again, but I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Maybe. You should tell them," I said, "where their water really comes from." Karen froze, but her husband blurted out, "It's just scare tactics, he's lying." The crowd didn't buy it. More neighbors were pulling out their phones, searching water maps, and in seconds someone shouted, "He's right. The subdivision's supply line runs from the lake." The air shifted. Suddenly I wasn't the target anymore. Karen was. A man in a baseball cap stormed toward her. "My kids drink that water every day, Karen. What the hell did you do?" Another voice yelled, "You poisoned all of us just to stop him from fishing?" The smugness drained from her face, but she still tried to claw her way out. "He's exaggerating. It was just an herbicide treatment." But then a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Not called by me, but by one of the neighbors panicking about their sick kid. The deputy stepped out, and when I recognized him, I almost smiled. He was my cousin. Karen didn't know that yet. He walked straight to me first, shaking my hand before turning to the HOA crowd. "All right, who's responsible for dumping chemicals in that water?" he asked, his voice sharp. Karen stuttered, pointing at me like a child caught in a lie. It was him. He's trying to blame us." My cousin glanced at me, then back at her, and pulled a small body cam from his chest. "Funny thing is, we already reviewed his footage." He played the same clip for everyone, only this time on official equipment. No one dared laugh now. The HOA crowd started to unravel. People who had stood behind Karen just hours ago were now backing away from her like she carried a disease. One man shouted, "You risked our families just to bully him?" Another woman grabbed Karen's arm, furious. "My daughter's in the ER because of you." Karen tried to hold her ground. "This is being blown out of proportion. It's just a little contamination. The lake isn't even his." She stopped mid-sentence because I was already holding up the deed. My cousin took it from my hand and read it out loud so everyone could hear. The lake, the shoreline, the water rights, all belong to me. Not the HOA, not Karen. Me. The sheriff's radio crackled. Reports were coming in fast. Several residents had already been rushed to the hospital with severe stomach pain. The deputy's tone hardened. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for environmental tampering and reckless endangerment." He started toward Karen, but she suddenly lunged at me, screaming, "You set me up. You think you're so smart." Her outburst was her biggest mistake. Every phone in the crowd was recording, catching her red-handed as she confessed to everything in her rage. 2 deputies wrestled her back, cuffing her while the HOA president hung his head in shame. The neighborhood was no longer angry with me. They were terrified of her. I looked across the restless crowd and said, "You wanted to poison my fish, but now you've poisoned your own people." Karen thrashed in the deputy's grip, shouting wild excuses, but the crowd's silence cut sharper than handcuffs. No one defended her now. Parents clutched their kids, neighbors whispered angrily, and the HOA board members who once cheered her on stood pale, realizing they were next in line. One of them, a balding man in a suit, tried to slink away, but I called out, "Don't bother running. I've got the whole board on camera authorizing those barrels." His face went white. The sheriff's deputy turned his glare toward the group. "So, this wasn't just her?" The crowd erupted again, pointing fingers, shouting names, betrayal spilling everywhere. The HOA president broke down, muttering, "She said it was legal. She said it was safe." But nobody cared. The deputies started lining people up, questioning them one by one. Then came the twist no one expected. My cousin leaned close and whispered, "EPA's already on their way. We flagged your footage to federal investigators." He pulled back with a grin. "This isn't just trespassing anymore. It's a federal crime." Karen's scream carried across the lake as they shoved her into the cruiser. Neighbors filmed every second, live streaming it to social media. By the time the squad car rolled away, the story had already gone viral. The HOA wasn't just collapsing, it was imploding in public. I stood at the water's edge, staring at the poisoned ripples. "Funny," I said under my breath. "They tried to ruin my fishing spot, but now they'll be swimming in lawsuits." The next morning, news vans lined the neighborhood entrance, their antennas sticking up like vultures circling a carcass. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, shoving microphones at anyone willing to talk. Neighbors who once bragged about their HOA's power now hid behind sunglasses, terrified of being recognized on camera. I walked down to the lake, boots crunching against the gravel. A cameraman spotted me immediately and rushed over. "Sir, are you the landowner? Can you confirm that the HOA intentionally poisoned your lake?" I didn't answer right away. I just bent down, scooped up a jar of the murky water and held it up to the lens. Dead fish floated behind me like evidence scattered by nature itself. The clip hit the evening news within hours. Across the state, people were furious. Calls poured into the sheriff's office demanding charges, demanding justice. But what the HOA never realized was how deep their trouble went. That same waterline didn't just supply their subdivision, it ran to 3 neighboring towns. By poisoning me, they had poisoned thousands. That night, I got a call from my cousin. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "EPA's officially stepping in. Hazmat crews are rolling tomorrow. Karen and the board? They're facing federal prison." He paused, then added, "And they'll probably be paying you restitution for the cleanup. And then some." I hung up, staring out over the moonlit water. The lake was wounded, but it would recover. The same couldn't be said for Karen's empire. She thought she could silence me with chemicals. Instead, she'd handed me the biggest weapon of all, truth, broadcast to the whole country. By sunrise, the neighborhood looked like a crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across the clubhouse. Hazmat teams in white suits waded into the lake, and news helicopters thumped overhead. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering like their entire world had collapsed overnight. Karen, meanwhile, was already plastered across every TV screen in the state. Her mugshot ran beside headlines that screamed, "HO leader arrested for poisoning water supply." She had gone from self-proclaimed queen of the subdivision to the most hated woman in town in less than 24 hours. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, when a neighbor I barely knew approached. His voice cracked with shame. We should have stood up to her sooner. She convinced us you were the problem. But you were the only one telling the truth." I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence sink in before replying. That's the thing about bullies. They count on silence. Later that day, the sheriff held a press conference by the lake. Cameras flashed as he confirmed charges of environmental tampering, fraud, and reckless endangerment against Karen and the HOA board. Then, in front of everyone, he handed me a folder. Inside were permits officially recognizing me as the protected owner of the lake and its water rights. He leaned in and whispered, "They'll never touch this land again." The crowd applauded, but I noticed some of Karen's old allies glaring, already plotting their excuses. I knew this wasn't just about one arrest. This was about dismantling an entire system of control that had nearly destroyed my home. And I wasn't done yet. By the end of the week, the entire subdivision had flipped upside down. With the HOA board behind bars and Karen's name trending nationwide, the state had suspended the HOA's charter. All their fake rules vanished overnight. Neighbors who once marched behind Karen's orders were now coming to me with apologies, petitions, even homemade pies, trying to win back my goodwill. But I wasn't interested in small gestures. The damage to the lake was worse than anyone thought. Thousands of fish dead, soil saturated with chemicals, cleanup costs skyrocketing. Federal agents had set up a command post at the edge of my property, and they weren't just investigating. They were gathering evidence for a civil suit that could bankrupt the HOA and every officer on its board. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the poisoned water, my cousin parked his cruiser beside me. "It's official," he said quietly. "Karen's being transferred to federal custody. She'll be facing up to 20 years, maybe more, and the HOA's insurance won't cover a dime." I exhaled slowly, a weight lifting off my chest. "Good," I said. "People need to know you can't trample on someone's land and get away with it." He gave me a sly grin. "Funny thing, because of this case, state lawmakers are drafting new protections for private water rights. They're literally naming it after you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a smile tug at my face. Karen had tried to take my peace, my lake, and my dignity. Instead, she'd triggered a law that would protect others for generations. I glanced at the water, still dark but reflecting the fading sky, and thought, she tried to poison my world, but she ended up purifying it instead. Would you like me to write a final emotional ending section, the 8th, that ties everything together and gives the audience a powerful closing note? Months later, the lake was alive again. The EPA crews had finished their work, and fresh water flowed through the basin, clear and sparkling like nothing had ever touched it. Fish darted beneath the surface. Kids laughed as they cast their lines, and for the first time in years, my land felt whole. Karen, on the other hand, had disappeared from the world she once tried to control. Federal prison was her new kingdom, and the HOA she ruled with an iron fist was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Every time her name hit the news, it wasn't about power. It was about disgrace. I sat on the dock one quiet morning, my son beside me with a fishing pole, the sunrise painting the sky in red and gold. He looked up at me and asked, "Dad, are we safe now?" I squeezed his shoulder and nodded. "Yeah, we're safe, and no one will ever take this from us again." The camera of life had shifted. The man they tried to crush was now the one protected by law, by truth, and by the people who finally saw through the lies. And as I reeled in the first trout of the season, I couldn't help but think, I didn't fight for this land just to fish. I fought for it because freedom means nothing if you can't protect your own home. That was the end of the HOA's reign and the beginning of mine.